Welcome to SOT Talkies. Today we are honored to be speaking with Mr. Covey, a renowned author, speaker, and leadership expert. Mr. Covey is the president of FranklinCovey Education and has dedicated his life to empowering individuals and organizations through principles of effectiveness, focus, and empowerment. He's the author of several books, the most prominent among them being The 7 Habits of Highly Effective Teens. He's co-authored The Leader in Me, which have inspired millions across the world to take charge of their lives and their leadership journeys. His work has transformed how leaders think about personal growth, organizational culture, and leadership values. We are thrilled to dive into his insights about leadership in 2025. Thank you, Mr. Covey, for joining us in this episode of SOT Talkies.
Thank you, Ali. Good to be with you. Thank you for having me on.
It's my pleasure.
Yes.
So, the first question that I would like to talk about is the most famous book, the most popular book about your father, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, which emphasizes 7 timeless principles. As we move further into 2025, what do you see as the biggest shifts in leadership styles as compared to, let's say, a couple of decades ago, especially in how leaders are applying these principles?
Sure, yeah. Well, I think the biggest shift going on right now is I think increasingly leaders are learning that their employees, their people don't want to be commanded and controlled, right? There's kind of 2 styles of leadership. There's command and control, and there's trust and inspire. And I think as we move more into the knowledge worker age, where you have to think about what to work on, and there's so many choices and opportunities, people don't want to be controlled, they want to be inspired. And so my father's work on the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, I think was kind of before his time. He always would say, it's not about me, it's about the principles, and paradigm is everything. And you need to, as leaders, we need to shift our paradigm from trying to manage, people, because people don't want to be managed. You manage things, you want to lead people. And so I think the biggest shift is really from, this command and control management style to a leadership style that's all about trusting and inspiring people. And the 7 Habits is all about seeing the greatness in people and unleashing gifts and talents that people naturally have.
So employees want more discretion, they want empowerment.
They want more discretion, they want more empowerment, they want more freedom, and they want to be trusted. You need to extend trust, and you need to inspire people. You can inspire by modeling, right? By giving people some slack, by giving them some freedom, by empowering them and letting them have or follow correct principles, and then let them govern themselves based on those principles.
And you also talk about leading by example in your book.
Yes, I think that's obviously very important. We find, so in schools, we have a program called Leader in Me, and we have it in thousands of schools across the world. We have several hundred here in Pakistan. And the whole idea is we basically teach faculty, the teachers in schools about the 7 habits. And we say, you need to model being proactive and thinking win-win and beginning with the end in mind.
The 7 habits.
The 7 habits. By modeling those, the students will see that and want to follow. But it starts with you. It's an inside-out process. And you really, all change is inside out. Starting with you, going to your team, and then to your organization. And to think we can turn that upside down is ridiculous, because it just doesn't work that way. And so we find in schools, if the principal, the headmaster, starting with him or her, will model these principles, it'll get into the teachers, and they model them and live them. And then they can teach with integrity, right? Because they're practicing what they're teaching.
So these are the, sorry to cut you there, but these are the principles, or these are the characteristics that leaders in 2025 and beyond need to embody.
Absolutely. I think You think about the 7 habits. The more difficult the challenges become, the more relevant the 7 habits are. The idea of being proactive, taking charge, not being a victim, beginning with the end in mind, thinking win-win, right? Which is mutual benefit. I want to win, I want you to win too. Seeking first to understand, then to be understood, which is the habit of empathy. And if you really want to influence somebody, you need to first understand them, right? The key to influence is to be influenced by other people first.
Two-way
right?
street.
Yeah, exactly. And so I just think increasingly it is so important to model everything you expect your people to do yourself, right?
Correctly so. But the world is changing at an unprecedented rate. So, whereas I do understand that leaders need to possess these qualities, but then they are also faced with challenges.
Yeah.
What do you think are the biggest challenges that leaders face today?
Yeah, I think the biggest challenges are increasingly you've got just more competition. This global competition is always coming at you, right, from every angle. AI is changing everything, right? It's moving so fast. And I think with AI, I think relationships become even more important because it's a powerful tool, of course, that can do so much and advance so many things and will change a lot of jobs, right? I'm seeing it in my own work, but it also, I think, makes human relationships more important, and building emotional bank accounts with people. But I think the biggest challenges right now are increased competition. I think AI, and I think this increasing need to empower people because it is there's too much command and control still going on. And what happens is a lot of leaders, everyone thinks, oh, I'm not a command and control leader. That's the biggest problem because most are authoritarian in their approach.
But they don't know.
But they do it in a nice way. So, it's kind of enlightened command and control. And they don't know this. But that, I think, slows down so much of what we see in management today.
As you just pointed out, with technological change, technology is transforming traditional leadership. And at the same time, if we talk about things like AI, automation, remote work, leadership styles need to evolve. Leadership styles need to change. How can leaders connect with their teams? How can they inspire their teams? And at the same time, how can leaders stay focused on their goals? The goals that you've talked about in your book, The 4 Principles of Execution.
Yeah, sure. Well, here's what we've learned, Ali, is that most leaders, if we go into any room and say, what are your goals? They'll come up with a lot of goals. And then we've done this experiment many times before with big companies. We go and ask their direct reports. Right? We'll go to a CEO of a company. What are your goals? They'll say, here are my 3 goals. We talk with his direct reports in this one situation. And they had, between his 9 direct reports, 36 goals. And so we went to the leader and said, your team thinks there are 36 goals. You said there's 4. What is it? But what we found is most people have far too many goals, initiatives, and it's complicated. And what we've learned is in the 4 disciplines of execution that if you really want to execute something well, you've got to narrow it down. You've got to bring the focus down to really 1 or 2 things. It doesn't mean that you don't have a lot of other things going on. It's kind of like,
More widely, the WYGs that you talk about.
Exactly. And it's like we call them wildly important goals. And we encourage leaders to say, what are the 1 or 2 things that if we did well would make all the difference? And we find that if people will focus in on that 1 or 2 things, that it makes that's how people get things done. The most impactful leaders today are those who are narrowing their focus and just saying, here's the 1 or 2 things we have to win at, and letting everything not go by the wayside, but you just don't give it the same amount of attention that you do. The most important thing. So a quick real example about this. So in 1958, there was the arms race going on, the space race between Russia and the United States. And Eisenhower, the president of the United States at the time, said we got to win. And they came out with NASA, National Aeronautical Space Association, to try to win the race. And they set all these goals. And the goal was lead the world in space exploration. And then they had 16 paragraph-long goals. And because of that, nothing got done. They got further behind. And then a few years later, in 1961, John F. Kennedy was elected. And he came in, and he narrowed the focus. And he said, we need to get a man to the moon and back safely by the end of the decade. That was in 1961.
He was able to do it.
And 8 years later, they were able to do it because they put a disproportionate focus on the things they couldn't solve at the time, like propulsion and navigation and life support. Because of that galvanization that went on with NASA, they were able to achieve something they had no business doing in 1969 when they landed on the moon, because of the galvanization. So they had 16 goals down to one clear thing, and that's the same way leaders need to lead today, honestly, is what is the singular thing we've got to get done? Everything else will take care of itself, but let's narrow the focus and galvanize people around an exciting goal.
So JFK was able to have an impact, considerable impact, by getting a man to the moon, because he had a very narrow focus and he focused on his most widely important goals. What advice would you give to aspiring leaders who would want to make a meaningful impact in 2025 and beyond?
Yeah, I think I'd just say figure out what's most important, right? Figure out your wildly important goal, model the kind of behavior you want to see in your people, and then inspire your people. And stop trying to command and control everything. People don't want to be managed, they want to be led. And meet with your people, come up with performance agreements with people so they can kind of manage themselves as much as possible. This is what I do with all of my people. I call it a win-win agreement. And so all my direct reports and I have an agreement we come up with. They give their input, I give my input, and we say this is how we're going to manage, and then I just let them run and do their own thing. And we have reporting, and they get back to me on a regular basis. But I think if you want to do something meaningful yourself, I think it's figuring out really what's most important for your business, whatever you're leading. Make sure everybody's engaged in it and understands what it is, because no involvement, no commitment, right? And then go for it. But remember, one thing I can think of when I was a kid, my father, Stephen R. Covey, used to always take me on business trips, and he'd take me to meet different CEOs and such. And he'd always say to people, remember to treat your people the same way you treat your finest customers. Because sometimes leaders can be hypocritical. They'll be so kind and so nice and gracious to a customer or a client, but then not show the same graciousness towards their own people.
So it's important to collaborate, include them in the decision-making process, to empower your own team.
Yeah, it's important to treat people as whole people. Whole people are body, mind, heart, and spirit. They're not just here for a paycheck. They want to be inspired. And by treating your own people the way you would your finest customers, what it does is it shows respect, right? It says you're just as important as this most important contract we have. And that radiates, that's culture, that communicates, like, I'm valued, and so I'm going to value my colleague, and it just radiates throughout a corporation. Culture starts with the leaders of a company. One leader, a few leaders at the very top can set a culture, and you're either building a culture deliberately that you're trying to build, or it's happening to you. And you're not trying to, it's just happening. And so you've got to have a deliberate strategy for building the kind of culture that you want inside your company.
We do aim to build a culture of collaboration and inclusivity, but how can leaders empower their teams to thrive and to innovate using this culture?
Yeah. Well, I think it's all about, there's really what we say, there's four essential roles of a leader. And one of them is, it starts with modeling. You've got to be a good example of what you're trying to get done. Okay. The second role, that permeates everything else, but the second role is pathfinding, is be very clear about the direction you're going, what hill you're trying to take. One study by John Cotter, Harvard Business School professor, stated that leaders undercommunicate not by a factor of 1 or 2 or 3 times, but by a factor of 10 or 20 or 100 times. And people really aren't clear about what we're trying to accomplish. So that's pathfinding. The next one is aligning, ensuring that systems and structures and compensation plans, etc., are aligned to get the outcomes that you want, right? And then finally, it's empowering. It's letting people loose and letting them go and not trying to control everything. And those are the 4 essential roles of leaders. And it's really important it's easy to get your head around and grasp. My job as a leader is I've got to be a good example. I've got to define where we're headed. I've got to make sure the systems are aligned to appropriately manage the outcomes we want. And then I've got to let my people run. And this is where we trust and inspire people instead of commanding and controlling them.
And you've talked about it in The Leader in Me.
Yes, we do that in Leader in Me. And Leader in Me it's a whole school transformation process that teaches students leadership. And so, students go to school, they learn how to read, write, and do math. But the most important skill of today, of the future, is leadership. It's the ultimate art. And as I travel the world a lot, I'm seeing increasingly a lot of employers, I'd say in general, 90% plus of employers aren't real happy with the graduates they're getting out of college or out of high school. They call it the career skills gap. They might have an engineering degree, but they don't know how to get along with other people very well, or they don't show up on time, or they're victims, in their mentality. They don't have these career skills that are so vital today, like collaboration. Like the 7 habits describe them so well, right? It's being proactive and knowing how to set and achieve goals, knowing how to get along well with other people, and knowing how to resolve conflicts and so forth. So the career skills gaps are big and seem to be widening as the world becomes more competitive in terms of these people skill sets are so increasingly vital, right? And so I think that's one of the key challenges for leaders today.
Thank you. Sean, throughout your career, you have emphasized the power of principles in guiding leadership. What's one principle, and this I want you to reflect on,
Sure.
What's one principle that has always guided you personally, and why do you think it remains important or relevant in 2025?
Sure. Yeah, well, one principle that's always guided me is the principle of renewal and balance. I'll choose 2 if that's okay, because they kind of go together. Renewal and balance, because they're so key and they're neglected a lot. In the 7 habits, this was really sharp in the saw. It's the idea of never be too busy driving to take time to get gas. And in our lives, we should never be too busy living to take time to renew ourselves, body, heart, mind, and spirit.
The 4 dimensions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we've got these 4 sides to us, and like 4 tires on a car, if one tire is low on air, way low, then all 4 tires will wear unevenly. And so I just, my own experiences, you've got to take time to renew yourself on a regular basis. So think about your life for a moment and think about, okay, physically, am I keeping myself fit? Am I managing my stress? Am I getting good sleep and nutrition? Right? Because if I neglect that, it's going to impact how I treat other people, right? So that's your body. You think about your heart, okay? That's relationships. And spending time with the people that are most important to you on a regular basis, making sure they have proper time. Like, I'm a father of many kids, and I have to plan this out. I've got to make sure I'm at my son's basketball game on a regular basis, and I travel a lot, but my most important thing are my children, and so I've got to make sure that I give them the proper time and attention, and I don't do that unless I plan ahead. Mentally, am I sharpening my saw? Am I reading constantly? Am I keeping up in my profession? Am I on the cutting edge of the latest thinking? Right? So important to continue to do that. And then spirit. By spirit, I mean meaning, purpose, what drives you and what inspires you. And doing things like, whether it's being in nature or reading inspiring literature, or whatever it is that inspires you, doing that on a regular basis. So I think so many leaders neglect this. You see this in education a lot. A lot of teachers just burn themselves out, and because they don't sharpen the saw. It also is a great way of modeling to your as a leader, to those who work for you, that hey, this person takes care of himself, and he is staying up on things, and it's inspiring to people. So that's a principle I've always strived to live, and sometimes I have to force myself to take a vacation.
Everybody needs one.
Everyone needs one, and your best work is done when you're in a good state, when you're balanced. And so that'd just be one thing I'd share with leaders is take time to sharpen the saw. Never be too busy driving to take time to get gas.
All right. You've written extensively. I read your book when I was a teenager.
Yeah, sure.
So would you like to talk about some of your work? Some
Sure.
of the books that you've written?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so I've written, I've written books for kids. I wrote 7 Habits of Highly Effective Teenagers, and I was shocked, Ali, to see how well the 7 Habits resonated with teens. I didn't know it would be like that, but it's like teens, they get it, they understand that, being proactive, not being a victim, makes sense. So I've written that book. I wrote the 7 Habits of Happy Kids, which is an illustrated picture book that's used in Leader in Me schools. Then I've written some business books like The Leader in Me. I was a co-author on that. And this is about how schools are changing across the world through teaching kids leadership. And I've written several other books in education, and including I wrote a book called The 4 Disciplines of Execution. And this is about the idea of setting wildly important goals and narrowing your focus and executing, because execution is so difficult. It's easy to come up with a great strategy, right? And it's hard to execute on it.
So do you call them WIGs or do you call them WIGs? Because each time I read, I just call them WIGs, and I'm like, this is not what the author probably had in mind.
Yeah, they're called WIGs, wildly important goals.
Okay.
And a wildly important goal is a goal that where no other goal that you achieve can compensate for failure in that goal. It's the goal that makes all the difference, right? It's getting a man to the moon and back by the end of the decade. So it's a WIG as opposed to a PIG, which is a pretty important goal. And it's not a BHAG, which is a big, hairy, audacious goal. It's a wildly important goal. But it works. The methodology that we talk about in the 4 Disciplines of Execution, it works really well. It's being used by thousands of corporations and schools across the world now. It's basically the idea of narrow your focus in on a few key lead measures, keep score, and account on a regular basis. And it's amazing what can get done.
And what are you currently working on? If you would like to give us a small teaser.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, well, I'm working on, so the 4 Disciplines of Execution has been the best-selling execution book in the business space. And now I'm making a version for education. So it's the 4 Disciplines of Execution for educators. So it talks about all the things educators deal with, like trying to get your discipline problems under control, right? Trying to raise student scores, right? And trying to raise placement in college. So many, engagement around like attendance and so forth. So I'm writing that. I'm also writing a book called The 7 Habits for Teens graphic novel. You know what a graphic novel is?
Okay.
Yeah, they've become pretty popular. Starting with Japan, made them really popular. So it's the 7 Habits for teenagers, but it's made fun it's a cartoon book.
And it was pretty popular with everybody these days.
Yeah, and a lot of people, increasingly, and I think it's a problem, teenagers don't read, right? They're on their phone all the time. But they'll read a comic book.
They definitely will.
And so this is kind of a comic book, but it's teaching the principles of the 7 Habits through a cast of characters. They go to a high school, and it's colorful and fun, and so that should come out in the next year.
Well, thank you so much, Mr. Covey, for joining us, and we look forward to having you again for some of the events that we will have in the future.
Thank you, Always good being with you. Thank you so much.
We are short of time, but I would have loved to prolong this conversation, but I think my colleagues would like to speak to you now.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you.